Hi, I'm Isaac, a software architect, about help understanding passwords. I decided to record this video because I know a lot of people, and I've heard from a lot of people quite often that there's trouble understanding passwords and using passwords, and basically they can just be a big pain. But I'm sure they don't have to be. As a matter of fact, I believe passwords are a very useful tool, and when used right, can be very beneficial. I think it's important to get help understanding passwords and to have a good understanding of passwords, because passwords are used for all kinds of things nowadays, and when passwords aren't used right, it causes really big issues. So I just want to talk about the advantage of passwords, why we have them, and then the whole point of passwords, how they work, and how to use them then appropriately. So first of all, why passwords? Passwords are a really useful, potentially beneficial tool, because if you were trying to prove that you were who you said you were using a physical object like a key or a card or something like that, if you were to lose this physical object, or if someone stole it from you, or even if it just broke, then you wouldn't be able to prove that you were who you said you were anymore. And possibly, if it was like in the case that it was stolen from you or you lost it and it was found by someone else could even impersonate you by pretending to be, claiming to be you. And as far as others would know, they would have just as much evidence that they were you as you did when you were using the physical object as the evidence or as the proof. Passwords are so much better than a physical object in that way, because they're in your head, they're in your mind. When used appropriately, when you don't miss the whole point of what they are and what they're supposed to be, passwords are something that you can't just leave laying around for somebody else to pick up and forget where you put it and not have it anymore. Or it's not like a physical key that can just get broken in half, and then if you don't have a backup, then you just can't, you just lose access to something important that you won't have access to anymore. Passwords are something that you take with you wherever you go automatically, and you always have it available to use and to enter it into a system, or to use it to prove that you are who you say you are in all kinds of contexts, simply by providing that input into a system and from your own mind. So in that way, they can be a very useful tool, but they have to be used appropriately. And so the whole point of passwords is two parts. There's something that you know, and there's something that no one else does. And so I really want to emphasize these two things, because a lot of the trouble with passwords comes from, I think, lack of understanding of the whole point of a password. So first of all, a password is supposed to be something you know. A lot of people don't know their passwords. If you don't know your password, then your password isn't something you know. So you're kind of missing the whole point. So I wouldn't be surprised if you don't, if people lack understanding of the root of what a password is supposed to be and how it's supposed to work, and then they have all kinds of trouble. And it's no big wonder that people have all kinds of trouble nowadays, when a lot of people don't even know what their own passwords are. So the first point, one of the most important part of the whole idea of what a password is and how it works, is that it has to be something that you know. So what I mean by this is, it has to be information that's in your mind. You have to memorize it. If you don't memorize your password, if you don't know your password, if you can't remember it, if you can't provide it back as input into a system, then it misses the whole point, and it's not really even a legitimate password. So, like I said, it's no big wonder that there's a lot of trouble with passwords, because people do often miss this point. So, one of the objections I hear a lot to the idea of memorizing a password is this idea of it's hard to memorize a password. A lot of people think it's really hard to memorize things, especially complex things or long things or things that are kind of abstract, or they don't think about very much in other contexts, or passwords in particular. A lot of people have the idea that it's really hard to memorize and remember and recall a password. Well, the thing about the ability to remember things and to memorize things is it is a skill, and a skill can be learned. And to say that, oh, I have a bad memory, I can't memorize things, I can't remember things very well, I'm just a person that can't, or if you think it might be because of the kind of person you are or something, you can look this up, because there's some very interesting research that's been done and information that's available for education into how memorization and memory work. And we find that often people are much more able to memorize and recall things than they think. As a matter of fact, you probably have a lot better memory than you think. You might think that you have a bad memory. It might just be that you can brush up on your skills of using your memory. And that seems to be the case from the books I've read, the book I've read on the subject, and the other resources I've looked into about memory. So the thing about a password is it's supposed to be something you know. And if you think, well, I can't memorize passwords, it's too hard, you can go out and find resources and educate yourself to improve your skills and abilities to memorize things, because I personally believe it's worth it. Again, they're used for everything, and using them wrong can cause big issues. So I've found personally for myself that when I've used the methods that are available out there, and I've made a practice of it, made an exercise of it, put forth a little effort to improve my ability to memorize and to remember these things, I found that it was like is said, that it's like research shows, that I had a lot better ability to memorize than I realized when I was willing to put forth the effort. I think a lot of times, I know for myself, we're tempted to say, I can't, it's too hard, just because it takes work, and it's an excuse not to put in the work to do it, frankly. And so I can understand that. I've been there with things, but I think it's worth putting in the effort, and I think you'd be surprised with a little bit of effort you can get a lot of reward and ability to memorize, and particularly in passwords. But you have to memorize passwords, because if you don't memorize a password, it misses the whole point. So a password is supposed to be something you know. That's the first thing. The second thing is a password is supposed to be something that no one else does know. So we've gotten past the point where we realize that we have to know our own passwords. We have to have them in our own mind, because that's the whole point of how they work and how we can use them, how they can provide a useful tool for us. But also, passwords have to be something that only you know. Nobody else can know your password. And again, this is another big point that's part of the whole point of what a password is and how they're supposed to work, that I see all kinds of people missing all the time. And that is that no one else is supposed to know your password. So the first thing, in order for your password to be something that no one else knows, is it has to be substantial. There has to be some length, or some people might use the term complexity to your password. Because if your password is the word password or the numbers 1, 2, 3, something like that is so obvious that it's something that everybody knows, or somebody could just guess. And then something that's like really obvious, or something that doesn't contain much information, that a lot of other people are already aware of or could easily guess is not going to be something that nobody else knows. And so in order for it to really be something that nobody else knows, it has to have some complexity. That's why you often see rules enforced, like a password must contain both lowercase and capital letters, or both letters and numerals, or maybe other symbols such as punctuation. And it must be a certain length. That's because a password must have sufficient complexity in order to be something that's not just immediately obvious to other people besides the one individual that's supposed to use it to prove that they are who they say they are. So the first point of a password being, that is a subpoint of a password being something that no one else knows, is it has to be sufficiently substantial or complex or long. And so things that are just really obvious and over simple are out of the question. A better term to use would actually be passphrase, because a better quote unquote password is actually not just one word, but something more like a phrase that could have multiple words, including normal capital and lowercase letters and spaces and other punctuations and characters. And the more complex, the better. And actually, this goes back to just a side note about memorization. Sometimes people think it's harder to memorize something more complex or longer, but actually the way memory works, you might find that your mind expands to absorb and take in the material that's being memorized. And memory is a function of making associations between things. And the more different kinds of associations you have and are able to make, actually the easier it is to memorize things. And sometimes, believe it or not, it can be easier to memorize something more complex. And so that's another thought to think about, to apply yourself to. But password has to be complex enough that it's not something that other people would know, that it's something that only you know. Next, a lot of people share passwords. And you should never share a password with anybody, because the whole idea of a password is it's supposed to be something that only you know. And if you share it with anybody else, then suddenly it's not something that only you know. And so you could have like a shared secret phrase or word or something that you share with other people for some reason or for some purpose. And if you come up with the use for that kind of a situation and insist on wanting to do that, that's fine. But that's really not a password. Just like if you don't memorize your password and have it in your mind and be able to recall it, it's really not a password. Because these 2 points that I'm sharing with you, that's what a password is. This is the very core, the very root of how password works. And this, by the way, is why there's so much trouble that so many people have with passwords, is because people miss the point, the whole root of what they are, how they're supposed to work. And so one point is, if it's something that only you know, you can't share it with anybody else. Because as soon as you share it with somebody else, then guess what? Then it's not something that only you know. It's something that you know and somebody else, and whoever they might share it with, accidentally or on purpose, or intending to or not. And once you let out a secret and it starts going through the grapevine, or there's gossip, people just have to understand, you just have to have boundaries that people have to respect, that shared passwords don't work, because telling your password to other people, then it's not a password anymore. And so if you have shared your password or told it to someone else, you should change it to one that only you know, because that's a part of what it is. Next, it's not supposed to be written down or recorded somewhere, because if you write down your password somewhere, then it's a physical object again. That place where you've written it down, whether you write it down on a piece of paper, in a notebook, or on a sticky note, then now that sticky note is the physical object, like a physical key. And then you lose the advantages of it being something that's in your head that you can recall from memory and provide that way. And you then have the vulnerabilities reintroduced where you could lose that piece of paper, or someone else could get it and use your password pretending to be you and impersonate you. And so as soon as the password is written down and you're relying on having it recorded somewhere besides memorizing it, or instead of memorizing it, then it's suddenly not something that you know and only you know anymore. And so it's not a password anymore. It's not a real password. So a lot of people have a lot of trouble with passwords. Passwords are one of the biggest pain points, one of the biggest issues that I've heard from people over and over again, as somebody who's had a lot of experience and some education in all different kinds of IT and computer and technology and software related stuff, especially software development. But I've talked to people, all kinds of people, in personal situations, in business situations, people in organizations, and all different kinds of people who have a lot of trouble, a lot of pain and problems with passwords. And a lot of times it comes back to the basics. It comes back to the fundamentals of understanding how a password works, understanding the very basic things of what a password is. And a lot of times what people are calling a password isn't even a real password. And that's what causes a lot of these problems. So I think understanding these things would help us be able to use passwords in a way that would be beneficial and advantageous, a lot easier, and save us a lot of pain, so that we could have painless passwords. I hope this helps. Please leave a comment if you have any questions or comments or concerns. Thank you very much.